Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity. So I'll be sharing these slides and this information that we put together, myself and Isaac from the Ghana side. So Irene has helped me a lot, but I'll start with these nuggets that I picked up about data management. One is quite religious. In God we trust, all others must bring data. That is the catchphrase of the world today. And there's also the comment that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted, pointing us to the need to be very sure of which variables we are picking and the impact it would make. And also something for data collectors to know that numbers have an important story to tell, but they rely on the people collecting it to make sure they give them the clear and convincing voice. And finally, most importantly, if it's not documented, it did not happen. And if we are provided with an easy way, we will do the right thing. So I'll be speaking about why. I think Irene has touched on that, so I'll move swiftly from there, then how we do it, and we do some practical sections. So data quality assurance, as Irene has already said, so it's a process. It continues almost forever to identify and correct data anomalies. So where there's an issue, we want to correct it. Why do we do that? We do that to be able to preserve data integrity or the quality. That want to make sure that the data is attributable, is legible, that's understandable, contemporaneous. When it's observed, it's entered, it's original, the source is accessible, and it's also accurate, it's complete and correct. And there's an Alqua Plus now, which includes complete and other attributes that data will need to satisfy. And this assurance also makes sure that our results too are valid. So when do you need a data quality assurance? When do you do it? So pre-study, peri, when you are doing the study, and post, there still needs to be a level of quality assurance. So for the pre, you need to have a plan. So pre-enrollment, there must be a plan for data collection. How will the data be collected? Will it be direct electronic with tablets or with a computer, with phones, or you'd have a paper source that will be entered into the electronic database? Then you also need to plan how data is collected, standardization. That is training your collectors to make sure they understand things in the same way and will do it in the same way as required. Then you might also need refresher trainings and quality controls, as Irene already alluded to, validation rules, your range checks, your skip patterns, your missing codes. Those are some of the things that would need to be implemented pre-enrollment. During enrollment, what do you need to do? For our site, we do a little bit of quality check because there's a paper and an electronic. The data manager does some routinely and randomly. One of the clinicians goes into the database to look at the data specific about 1% to check if everything is in shape. Then we also make use of the REDCap data quality model, as Irene said. So I'll go a little bit into detail about the inbuilt rules and the custom rules. And then there's also the ability to use other statistical tools. So I'll move specifically to the data quality model. For the data quality model, when you open your REDCap, you should see a screen like this. And your data quality model can be activated from your left-hand panel where the arrow is pointing. So once you click on that, you are going to be activating your data quality model. We are looking at the data quality model. So as Irene already showed you, this is the screen you'd see. And on this screen, there are two major sections for the data quality. They are the inbuilt rules, those that are already built into REDCap, and also the custom rules, the ones your data manager can write to also pick up any errors. In the data resolution, that is query generation, you need to query when you see a problem. So we would look at how to enable it, assigning users, opening, responding, and closing the query, and also locking. So in enabling the data resolution workflow on your REDCap, on your setup, project setup, you would go to the additional customizations. Once you click on that, you have a pop-up of a list of additional customizations. So you can look through, and there are others there which you can also explore, but our focus will be on the fourth one, which is enable field comment or data resolution workflows. That is the data queries. Once you click on that to enable it, we want to use the data resolution workflow. So we choose that as the option, and then we save it. Once you save it, you need to assign user rights as to who can ask a question, who can answer, who can close. So for our site, for instance, the data manager is able to open and close and respond, all three levels, but our data entry people can only respond to the queries as generated by the data manager. So you go to user rights, and as Anime said yesterday, it's better to create user roles so that for some of these things, if you have several users, you don't need to go and do those changes for every single user. Once you make the change to a role, everybody who is assigned to that role also gets that. So from our role, for example, data entry person, we can now say that where the arrow is pointing, we are only allowing the person to respond to queries. So you can see the options. So respond, all other things are blanked out. How do you open a query? This is an example of a screen from one of our database. That's a trial database. So to raise a query, for instance, realize that for this entry, the region, the residence of the individual was not indicated. So on your REDCap, beside the field, you see a yellow balloon there. That is your data resolution workflow. So once you click on that, it opens this dialog, which shows you the data resolution workflow. So if data has been entered as an audit trail, you find that this person entered this data at this time. But for this one, no entry has been made, and we are going to raise a query. So to open the query, you click on the button Open Query, assign the query to a user, and for more advanced REDCap updates, this is 11.2, you'd have the ability to assign to notify users even by email if there are queries to anything that they have entered and it has been assigned to them. So once it is assigned to them, you realize that the gray button, the gray balloon, now turns into a yellow one with a red exclamation mark on it. This just shows everyone who looks at it from the interface that there is a question or a query that has been asked about this field, Once you see that and you need to resolve the queries, on your left panel you see resolve issues just close to the data quality. So once you click on resolve issues, you'd have a listing of all the issues, all the queries that have been raised in that particular project. Example is I just raised one and assigned it to Isaac, Mr. Nyanor. So once I see this, I know that the question being asked of the field is that I should insert the region. The region is what is missing. So to go there directly, I click on the record ID. And once I click on the record ID, it takes me straight to the field which has been queried. Then I can move on to enter the value there and then click on save and then open data resolution workflow. So a query is raised, you answer it, you need to respond to the question that has been asked. So the question was an insert region. I have inserted the region. Now I respond to indicate why it was missing. So I just accept the fact that it was missing. I didn't put it there. And then explain how I resolved it. That is, the data was retrieved from the patient folder and entered. This helps to track what question was asked, how was the question answered by the user. Once that is done, I can now, if you can realize now, the red button now changes to a grayish button, just indicating that a response has been provided to the query that was raised. Once that is there and I click on it, it now opens for me as a data manager the ability to assess the answer which is there and either close the query or send it back to the person it was assigned to, for the person to relook at it. For this, we are just closing. So you choose the close query button and then the query is closed. And once it is closed, now the gray changes into a green button, indicated a question has been asked, a response has been given, and the response was satisfactory. Locking up. So for our site, we are to prevent any further changes to data once it has been verified. What we do now is the data manager can now lock it to prevent any other entry. Once it's logged, it can also be unlocked by someone with appropriate privileges. So we lock it to also ensure that nothing else is added. And once you lock it on your record status dashboard, a padlock is placed under the specific instrument for you to know that it has been logged and no further entries can be done on that one. Thank you very much. I think from here, we can then proceed to the practical session on how to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Evans. I think you can continue the practical session.
Okay, so for the practical session, I'm going to be using data which has been de-identified. So all names have been taken off. So this is a data set which contains, let's say, a Sparkle registry. So we have time points where people come and we fill specific forms for them. So let's say I am a data manager. So I look at this, and as we heard yesterday, the status icon shows us what is the status of the form. What is the status of the form? So if it's gray like this, then you know that there's nothing in there. No data has been entered. The form hasn't even been opened for anything to be done there. We are going to look at record 10. So for record 10, we are going to open records 10 registration, records 10's registration. So I open record 10's registration. And what I want to do is I'm looking through to make sure that everything is right. Everything is right. I spot that the region, for instance, or the digital address is missing. For the region, for instance, if I want to issue a query, ask the person, why is this not inserted? As I said earlier, you click on the yellow. Can you see the screen?
Yes, Evans, we can see it.
So you click on it, it opens the workflow. Then I choose open query. I'm going to ask a question. and then assign this query to, let's say, Isaac. And I tell the workflow that alert Isaac of this also via email and on the REDCap messenger, which is on your REDCap interface. And it is, please find and insert the region. So once I do that and I click open query, the button by that field now changes to, I'm going to zoom a little bit, realize that it changes to something with a red exclamation mark on it, a red exclamation mark. So I can raise as many as I want. So I'm going to raise another one still directed at Isaac. So once I do that, then I want to look at resolving. So to resolve, as I said, on your left-hand panel, you have resolve issues. Once you click on the resolve issues, you have a list of the issues that are pending. There are filters for the data resolution dashboard. So you realize that this is just filtering issues that have not been responded to. Issues that have not been responded to. You can also decide to filter closed issues. So if I filter closed issues, the first one I use as example is there, but we are going to look at issues that have not been resolved. So I look at the issues that have not been resolved. I want to look at the digital address field, which has been queried. So I click on the record and it takes me directly there. So let's say the person digital address is 1198/8227. Then once I do that, I click on save and open data resolution pop-up. So it saves the value. So saves the value, tells me the time I made that change, and then I can respond and say data missing and say inserted now. And I respond to query. Once I respond, it changes to gray. If I want to close it as a data manager, click on the gray, it opens up. I think this is satisfactory. And then I close the query. So once I close the query, it changes to a green button, indicating that the query has been resolved. Then we'll look at the data quality. So we've looked at how to raise queries, respond to queries, and then close the queries. If I am okay with this whole form and all other fields are correct in my estimation, we are currently trying to start implementing this external model, which helps you to verify all fields on your worksheet without going individually to each field to verify it. So you just click on it once it's implemented on your side. You just click on it. It goes on to verify, mark all of them green to indicate that you've seen all of them. But you note that it still keeps the one which has a query with the balloon with a green tick, indicating an issue was there and it was resolved. If I think the form is complete, then I lock the form and say, exit form, I'm done with it. So it's locked. It's locked now. And if anyone opens it, what they will see is this instrument has been locked and all the fields will be grayed out. All the fields will be grayed out, preventing. If I want to unlock with appropriate privileges, I can also unlock and do any changes. Then let's look at the data quality model. So for the data quality model, you realize that there are inbuilt rules that REDCap already has. But unfortunately, most of them don't seem to be executed real time as data is being entered. They are not executed real time. So for instance, we can look at blank fields which are required fields only. Mostly, if you have skip patterns, executing rule A is mostly redundant because it pulls up every field that has been skipped. For instance, in this data set, because there are a lot of skip patterns, we realize that there are about 9,987 blank fields that it finds. But if I should look at required fields, so fields that are required, that were left blank, that is just about 276. That means that out of the 9,000, just 296 are fields that actually needed to be completed that were not completed. And once you run the rule, you can also export or view it. So if I decide to export, it will show me every specific field that has that blank field. So I can look at it. So I'm just going to open it. So it shows you the record ID and which field is blank. So it tells you which field is blank there, which arm is blank there that you need to look at. So coming back to where we are. So these are the inbuilt. You can execute as many as you want and look at it to see whether they are relevant to you. So you can have hidden fields that contain values. This is mostly true for if you have skip patterns, then most probably you have some fields that were supposed to be skipped that the person put in a first answer, was allowed entry into that field, and then change the preceding question. So you can also execute any of the inbuilt rules, and then you can have an indication of the discrepancies that is there. Also available is the ability to add your own custom rule. So for instance, let's say we want to look at those who were, let's say we think that there are people who might have consent dates that were earlier than their date of birth, indicating one of the dates is right. So I can label this consented before birth, just to pick up that error if I think that is there. To be able to do that, I will need to know some of the fields that reference that. So for us, we are going to be looking at the consent date. If the consent date is less than the date of birth, so you need to know the field. So I'm just going to try to find which one is the date of birth. So I know it's date birth, and I know my consent date is consent_date. So I want to make sure that the consent date should be greater than. You must be born before you are consented. So we want to look at, it is a discrepancy if your consent date is less than your date of birth. That is the query we've written here, that it should pick up every value, every record in which its consent date is earlier than its date of birth. So we can add it, and once we add it, when we execute, it will pull up a list of records in which their consent date is earlier than their date of birth. So we can view it from here and look at it. So you realize that it shows you those two values. So for instance, for record 72, the consent date indicated is 15th January 2018. But the person was born 16th June 2018. Obviously, there's a discrepancy. The person was consented almost 5 months before the person was born, which is not true. So those are some of the things you could look at and pick. So if it is a custom rule that you added on your own, you can tell REDCap to execute this in real time. That means that as people are entering data, once they enter a consent date, which is earlier than a date of birth, it should flag it so that the person knows that he's making a mistake even before you come and pick it up in your data resolution, your data quality workflow. So we've looked at the inbuilt, we've looked at one custom, and we've also enabled it. So I think that would be all I would want to explain here. And then we look at exporting. So once you are raising queries to, you also have the ability to know how quickly your resolutions happen, how quickly your resolutions are happening. I think this is part of the things that are sent to the hub. You need to show us which fields are being queried the most, which records are being queried the most, and also what is the average time that responses are provided to queries. And this graph is also quite good for even the data manager. If you realize that the region field is being queried too much, then you might need to go back and maybe implement a range check or make it a required field that sort of prompts the person immediately when they need to enter that. So once you get to your quality and realize something is being persistent, it's happening repeatedly, then you might need to think of a rule in the data that prevents that from even getting on board before you come and pick it in your data quality checks. Thank you very much. I think I'll pause here.
Yes, good morning. Yes, I wanted to find out. Good morning. Okay, I wanted to find out, what do you mean by the AC switch is not working?
That switch where we can turn it on and off. It is socket.
Oh, on the wall.
On the wall.
Please, are there any questions, Daniel?
I look at the chat box. I didn't see any question, but actually I want to thank you for that lecture that you provided. That is very useful for, especially for data managers, so that you can manage your data to look like to be in a good quality, especially in establishing the rules. That is very important to actually validate the data before that has been entered. So that was very, very excellent presentation.